We all have them, don't we? Those perfect little snapshots of our past, frozen in time. A family photo on the mantelpiece, a wedding portrait hanging in the hallway. We look at them and we see smiles, we see joy, we see a moment captured forever. But what if that moment wasn't just captured, but trapped? What if the smiles were a lie, and the joy was a mask for something truly monstrous? Welcome, my friends, to Family Secrets Unveiled. Today, we're not just looking at a portrait. We're peeling back the layers of a dark and twisted tale. A story of a family that, on the surface, seemed to have it all, but beneath the veneer of perfection, hid a truth so vile it could curdle your blood. A story so chilling, it will make you question every picture on your wall. Our story begins in the seemingly idyllic town of Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of rural Pennsylvania. A place where everyone knows their neighbor, where the pace of life is slow, and where secrets are supposed to be as rare as a winter rose. But some secrets, my friends, are like weeds. They grow in the most unexpected places and strangle everything beautiful around them. Meet the Abernathys, a name you might recognize if you've ever flipped through an old society magazine. They were the epitome of old money, of quiet elegance. Richard Abernathys, a man with the sharp, intelligent eyes of a born leader, and his wife, Eleanor, a woman whose beauty seemed to defy time, with skin like porcelain and hair the color of spun gold. They had 2 children, a son, Thomas, and a daughter, Evelyn. Perfect family, a picture-perfect life. And for decades the Abernathys were a fixture in the community. Richard ran the family's vast real estate empire with an iron fist, his reputation for shrewd deals legendary. Eleanor was the patron saint of every local charity, her name gracing the plaques of hospitals and art galleries. Thomas, their son, was a star athlete and a brilliant student, the kind of young man every father dreams of having. And Evelyn, their daughter, was an artist, her ethereal paintings of the local landscape fetching exorbitant prices from collectors all over the country. Their house, an old Victorian mansion with sprawling gardens and ivy-covered walls, was a testament to their wealth and taste. But it was the inside, specifically the grand ballroom, that held the most intriguing artifact. Hanging above the marble fireplace was a family portrait. Not a new one, mind you. This was a portrait commissioned back in 1965, the year Thomas was born. It depicted the 4 of them: Richard, Eleanor, Thomas as an infant in his mother's arms, and a young Evelyn, perhaps 5 years old, standing by her father's side. Now, a portrait like this isn't unusual. But what was unusual, what was truly deeply unsettling, was that the Abernathys never took another one. Not for Christmas, not for a birthday, not a single new family portrait in over 6 decades. People whispered about it, of course. They'd ask Richard or Eleanor about it at dinner parties, and they'd simply smile that charming, Abernathy smile and say, "Why? We already have the perfect one, don't we?" And they did. The portrait was a masterpiece. The artist, a reclusive man named Alistair Thorne, had captured their likenesses with an almost uncanny precision. But what struck people, what made them pause and stare, wasn't the artistry. It was the people themselves. Richard and Eleanor, as they stood in the portrait, were in their late 20s. And decades later, as they hosted their elegant parties and strolled through their gardens, they looked exactly the same. They did not age. Their faces were smooth, their hair untouched by a single strand of gray. They were, for all intents and purposes, a living, breathing anachronism. Thomas and Evelyn, however, aged. They grew older, their faces showing the lines of time, their hair slowly turning gray. It was a bizarre and unsettling contrast. A family where the children aged, but the parents did not. The townsfolk, being a superstitious lot, began to whisper. Some said it was a curse, others a pact with the devil. A few, the more cynical ones, thought it was simply a testament to the family's immense wealth and access to radical cosmetic treatments. But even the most advanced science couldn't explain the full extent of it. Richard's mind was as sharp as ever, his memory a steel trap. Eleanor's movements were as graceful and nimble as a woman half her age. It wasn't just their appearance. It was their very being. They were frozen in time. The mystery deepened when Alastair Thorne, the artist who painted the portrait, vanished without a trace just a few months after its completion. His studio was found empty, his canvases and paints still arranged as if he just stepped out for a moment. But he never came back. The police, after a cursory investigation, wrote it off as a voluntary disappearance. He was a recluse after all. Perhaps he simply decided to drop off the grid. But for a young local historian, a man named Marcus Thorne, the disappearance of his namesake great-uncle was not a simple case. Marcus had spent his life surrounded by the whispers and rumors of his great-uncle's mysterious talent and even more mysterious disappearance. He was obsessed with the Abernathys portrait and what it represented. He believed, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that his great-uncle's vanishing act was directly tied to the Abernathys' unnatural youth. Marcus, a man with a wild mop of red hair and a perpetually caffeinated look in his eyes, had been digging for years. He'd pored over Old Town records, interviewed the few remaining people who remembered Alastair, and studied every detail of the Abernathys family. His obsession cost him his job, his relationship, and nearly his sanity. He was a man on the brink, chasing a ghost. And then, one chilly autumn night, he found something. A single, faded letter tucked away in a dusty old trunk in his great-uncle's attic. It was addressed to Alastair, but it was not from the Abernathys. It was from a man named Elias Vance, a former colleague of Alastair's, and the words were chillingly direct. The price for immortality is a soul. The canvas is a cage. Do not finish it, Alastair. For your own sake, do not finish it. The letter was a puzzle, a cryptic warning that Marcus couldn't decipher, but it confirmed his darkest suspicions. The portrait was more than just paint on a canvas. It was something else entirely. It was a key, a vessel, or perhaps a prison. And as Marcus held the letter, his heart pounding in his chest, a cold dread settled over him. For the letter was dated 1965, the same year the portrait was painted, the same year Alastair Thorne vanished. And it was in that moment that Marcus knew. The Abernathys family didn't just stumble upon eternal youth. They paid for it. And the price, he was certain, was far more terrible than anyone could imagine. The truth, he suspected, was locked away in that portrait. And he was going to find out what it was. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that by looking into the darkness would look back. Marcus's discovery was a jolt of ice water, a confirmation of a truth he had been chasing for so long. The letter, with its chillingly simple warning, was the key he needed. But it was only the beginning. He knew that the Abernathys, and their unervingly perfect lives, held the rest of the puzzle. He couldn't just confront them. A direct approach would be suicide. They were too powerful, too well-connected. He needed a way in, a crack in their impenetrable facade. And that crack, he realized, was Evelyn Abernathys. Evelyn, the artist, the ethereal daughter who had aged while her parents remained frozen in time. She was the family's wild card, the one who seemed to carry a weight of sorrow in her eyes that no amount of success could erase. Marcus had observed her from afar for years, watching her movements, her subtle shifts in demeanor. She was a woman of immense talent but also immense melancholy. Her paintings, though beautiful, had an undercurrent of something dark, a sense of entrapment. It was as if she was painting her own prison. Marcus knew he couldn't simply walk up to her and demand answers. He needed to be subtle to build trust. He started frequenting the local art gallery where Evelyn often displayed her work. He studied her paintings not just for their artistic merit, but for clues. He noticed a recurring motif, a small, almost imperceptible detail in the background of many of her landscapes. A cage. A bird cage, sometimes empty, sometimes with a single, dark feather inside. It was a strange, haunting signature, a whisper of something she couldn't say aloud. One afternoon, he found her there, alone, staring at one of her own canvases. The painting was of a lush, green forest, but in the distance, partially obscured by trees, was a tiny, perfect rendering of the old Abernathys mansion. And right in the center of the canvas, almost invisible to the casual observer, was a birdcage. Marcus approached her cautiously. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice soft, "but so sad." Evelyn turned, her eyes, the same piercing blue as her mother's, holding a mix of surprise and defensiveness. "Art is not always about beauty, sir. Sometimes it's about truth." "And what truth is this?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the canvas. "The truth of a cage, perhaps?" Her eyes widened just for a moment, a flicker of fear and recognition before she quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I think you know a great deal about cages, Ms. Abernathys. The kind that don't have bars. The kind that are made of secrets." Evelyn's composure shattered. She looked around, her hands trembling slightly. "You need to leave." "My great-uncle's name was Alastair Thorne," Marcus said, the name hanging in the air between them like a ghost. "He painted your family portrait. And then he vanished." The color drained from Evelyn's face. The mention of the artist's name, the one person connected to her family's deepest secret, was the key Marcus had been looking for. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was not only aware of what had happened but was also a silent, suffering participant. Evelyn led him outside, her movements quick and furtive. They found a secluded bench in a nearby park, a place where they could speak without being overheard. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "How do you know that name?" she finally asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "He was my great-uncle. I've been looking for him for years. And all the paths, they lead back to that portrait." Marcus recounted his years of research, the rumors, the oddities, the fact that her parents had not aged a day. He told her about the letter he found, the warning from Elias Vance. As he spoke, he watched her face. He saw the years of repressed emotion, the pain, the guilt. He saw a person trapped, just as the motif in her painting suggested. When he finished, Evelyn was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the ground. "You're not the first to look," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "My brother, Thomas? He tried to find out the truth, too. He was so angry, so resentful of them, of what they did to us." "What did they do?" Marcus pressed. Evelyn looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "They made a deal with Alastair, a deal for their immortality. They didn't tell us, not until it was too late. They wanted to be young forever. They wanted to have everything." She took a shuddering breath. "The portrait, it's not a painting. It's a vessel. It holds a piece of our souls. Piece of us. When Alastair painted us, he didn't just capture our likenesses. He captured a part of our essence. And for my parents, they used it to freeze themselves, to stop time for them alone." Marcus's mind raced, trying to process her words. "But why did you and Thomas age? Why wasn't it the same for you?" "Because we were not part of the deal," Evelyn said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "We were the price. Alastair warned them, told them the deal was monstrous. But they didn't listen. They promised him a fortune. And in their greed, they didn't realize the full cost. The magic, or whatever it was, required a sacrifice. And that sacrifice, it was our youth. The more we aged, the more they stayed the same. Our stolen years are what fuel their immortality." A cold, sickening feeling washed over Marcus. The family portrait wasn't just a symbol of their perfect life. It was a testament to their monstrous selfishness. They had willingly condemned their own children to a life of aging and eventual death, just so they could live forever. The smiles in the portrait, the joy on their faces, it was all a lie, built on the slow, agonizing decay of their children. "And what about Alastair?" Marcus asked, his voice low with dread. "What happened to him?" "He tried to warn them," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "When he realized the full horror of what he had done, what they had done, he tried to destroy the portrait. He told them he wouldn't let them go through with it. He told them he would expose them. And they couldn't allow that." Marcus's heart pounded. He knew the answer before she even spoke it. "They killed him." Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Worse, they trapped him. His body, it was a husk. They drained him, all his talent, his essence. They used it to power the spell. They sealed his soul into the canvas itself. He's in there, Marcus, trapped inside that portrait, a prisoner in his own masterpiece. The revelation was a hammer blow. It wasn't just a deal, not just a sacrifice. It was a monstrous act of murder and spiritual imprisonment. The painting was not a vessel. It was a grave, and the Abernathys were the gravediggers. The smiling faces of Richard and Eleanor, frozen in time, were a monument to their crime. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes pleading. "You have to help me, Marcus." Thomas, he tried to find a way to destroy it, to free Alistair, to stop this horror. But they found out, and they did something to him. He's not himself anymore. He's a shadow, a hollow shell. A shiver of fear ran down Marcus's spine. Thomas, the golden boy, the star athlete, now a hollow shell. What had they done to their own son? What monstrous act had they committed to silence him? Marcus looked into Evelyn's eyes, seeing not just a woman in pain, but a desperate accomplice, a victim pleading for liberation. He realized that his mission was no longer just about his great-uncle. It was about saving Evelyn. It was about freeing the living from the clutches of the immortal. And as he looked at her, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his journey into the Abernathys family's dark secret was about to take a turn for the truly dangerous. He had found a crack, but he had no idea that by prying it open, he would expose not just a secret, but a monster. And the monster, he knew, was now watching him. The conversation with Evelyn had changed everything. Marcus's quest for answers had become a desperate race to save a family, or what was left of it, from a living nightmare. He knew the Abernathys wouldn't allow their secret to be exposed. He also knew that they were monsters capable of anything. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Evelyn, still trembling, told him that the portrait was a nexus of their power. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, would often retreat to the ballroom where it hung, spending hours in its presence, as if drawing strength from it. It was their power source, their anchor to a timeless existence. Marcus's mind, a whirlwind of fear and purpose, began to formulate a desperate idea. If the portrait was the source of their immortality, it had to be the key to their downfall. He had to destroy it. But Evelyn's chilling account of her brother, Thomas, being reduced to a hollow shell by his own parents, was a stark warning. The Abernathys would not hesitate to use their unholy power against anyone who threatened them. "I have to get to the portrait," Marcus said, the words a grim determination. Evelyn's eyes widened in terror. "You can't. They'll stop you. They'll do to you what they did to Alistair, what they did to Thomas." "I don't have a choice," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "They're not just immortal. They're parasites. They feed on your life, Evelyn. They'll consume you completely." He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, mixed with profound fear. She was torn between her desire for freedom and the paralyzing dread of her parents' wrath. He had to convince her. "Tell me everything," he said, taking her hand. "Tell me about the house, the portrait, everything you know." Evelyn, with the urgency of a woman escaping a fire, began to talk. She described the house not as a home, but as a carefully constructed cage. Her parents had installed a complex security system, but it was surprisingly simple to bypass, designed more to keep unwanted visitors out than to keep the family in. The real security was a much older, darker kind. The house itself, she explained, felt alive, as if it was a part of their parents' will. She told him about the ballroom, its heavy oak doors always locked. Only Richard and Eleanor had the key, a single, ornate key that never left Richard's person. The lock was an old, complex mechanism, a masterwork of pre-industrial design. Marcus's historian's mind clicked. He knew about that type of lock. A master locksmith could crack it, but he wasn't a locksmith. He needed to get the key, and that meant getting close to Richard Abernathys. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Willow Creek was preparing for its annual Founders' Day Gala, a grand affair hosted, of course, by the Abernathys. It was their moment to shine, to be the town's beloved, ageless patriarch and matriarch. It was the perfect stage for a confrontation. Marcus, using his historical connections, secured a last-minute invitation. He dressed in a rented tuxedo, a far cry from his usual rumpled clothes. He felt like a ghost in his own skin, walking into the lion's den. Evelyn had agreed to help, but her eyes were still filled with a terrified, hunted look. She was his guide, his accomplice, his last hope. The gala was everything Marcus had imagined. The Abernathys mansion was a beacon of light and music, filled with the town's elite. Richard, in a pristine suit, and Eleanor, in a shimmering silver gown, greeted their guests, their smiles radiant, their youth an unsettling contrast to the aging faces around them. They were the center of attention, the subjects of hushed whispers and awestruck glances. Marcus and Evelyn met discreetly in a secluded corner of the library. "He's in the study now," Evelyn whispered, her voice tight with fear. "He always checks the evening's accounts before the main toasts." The plan was simple and insane. Evelyn would create a diversion, drawing Richard and Eleanor away from the study. Marcus would slip in, find the key, and then make his way to the ballroom. They had no idea what would happen next, only that it would be the climax of a 60-year-long tragedy. Evelyn, with a courage Marcus hadn't known she possessed, walked onto the crowded main staircase. She tripped, a loud, theatrical stumble that sent a platter of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. The sound was deafening, the shattered glass scattering like diamonds. The crowd gasped. Richard and Eleanor, their perfect smiles momentarily frozen in place, rushed to her side. The distraction was perfect. Marcus, heart pounding, slipped down a side corridor, finding the study door. It was unlocked. Richard, in his arrogance, never expected anyone to dare trespass in his personal domain. Inside, the room was dark and cavernous. Marcus's eyes, adjusting to the dim light, scanned the desk. The key wasn't there. Panic began to set in. He rifled through the drawers, his movements becoming frantic. The key was a unique, ancient design, a relic of a time long past. He had to find it, and then he saw it, not on the desk, but on a hidden shelf behind a row of books. Richard hadn't left it in the open. He had tucked it away, a subtle sign of his paranoia. Marcus's fingers closed around the cold metal of the key. It was heavy and strangely warm. He felt a faint hum, as if it were alive. He turned to leave, but as he did, his foot caught on a small rug, and he stumbled. A book fell from a shelf, hitting the floor with a loud thud. The door to the study swung open. Richard Abernathys stood there, his perfect smile replaced by a look of cold, calculating fury. His eyes, usually so benign, now held a chilling, otherworldly glint. Well, Richard said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "The little historian. I knew you were poking around, but I never thought you'd be so foolish as to come into my home." Marcus, holding the key tightly in his hand, stood his ground. "You're a murderer, Richard. You're a monster. You and Eleanor condemned your own children to feed your sick obsession." Richard's perfect facade cracked. His lips peeled back in a sneer. "And what does a little historian know about the true price of greatness? We gave Alistair a chance at immortality. He refused. He was weak. We simply took what was ours." Suddenly, the room darkened. A gust of wind, though the windows were closed, whipped through the study, sending papers flying. The very air began to hum with a strange, malevolent energy. Richard's face twisted into something unnatural, a grotesque mask of rage. His eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and the lines on his face seemed to deepen, then vanish. It wasn't a show of force. It was a warning. Eleanor appeared behind him, her face a mask of serene hatred. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, her voice a whisper that was somehow louder than a scream. "We are not of this world anymore. We are beyond your petty rules." Marcus felt a wave of crushing despair. They were right. He was just a man. They were something else. But he looked at the key in his hand, the key to their prison, their power, and he knew he had to try. He lunged past Richard, running into the main hallway. The gala had stopped. Everyone was staring, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Evelyn was standing at the foot of the stairs, her face pale. "The ballroom!" Marcus yelled, his voice echoing through the mansion. He ran, the Abernathys in pursuit. They weren't running so much as gliding, their movements unnaturally fast, their perfect smiles now a chilling rictus. They were the shadows of what they once were, now revealing their true, monstrous form. Marcus threw himself against the heavy ballroom doors. The key slid into the lock, a perfect fit. He turned it, the old mechanism groaning as it complied. The doors swung open, and there it was, the family portrait. It hung above the fireplace, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The faces of Richard and Eleanor were serene, youthful, perfect. But the faces of Thomas and Evelyn, though painted in their youth, had an unsettling stillness, a hollow emptiness in their eyes. And in the corner, almost hidden, was a tiny, grotesque figure, a man trapped within the canvas, screaming silently. It was Alistair Thorne. Marcus, without a second's hesitation, threw the key into the fireplace, where it clattered against the grate. He reached for a heavy brass poker, his hands shaking. He had to end this. But as he raised the poker, a voice, a ghost of a voice, whispered in his mind, "Don't. The magic is a binding. If you destroy the canvas, you destroy the souls within it. You will kill us all." Marcus froze. It was Alistair's voice. The man's soul, trapped in the portrait, was warning him. The portrait wasn't just a vessel. It was a prison that held its captives, and its destruction would mean their ultimate demise. He wasn't just here to destroy a painting. He was here to commit an act of mass murder. And then, a new voice, a familiar voice, came from behind him. "You won't kill us, Marcus. You couldn't. You're not a monster like them." Marcus turned. Thomas was standing at the entrance to the ballroom. But it wasn't the Thomas from the gala. It was the hollow shell Evelyn had described. His eyes were vacant, his face expressionless. He was a puppet, his own will stripped away. And as Richard and Eleanor glided into the ballroom, their expressions triumphant, Thomas raised his hand, a finger pointing directly at Marcus. "He wants to destroy the canvas," Thomas said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He wants to kill us all." The final twist, the ultimate betrayal. The Abernathys had not only stolen their children's youth, they had broken their minds, turning one of them into their own personal, soulless weapon. The climax had arrived, and Marcus was trapped, not just by an immortal couple, but by the very tragedy they had created. He held the key to their destruction, but destroying it would mean killing the victims he had come to save. He was at a crossroads, a moment of pure, terrifying choice, and the Abernathys, with their perfect smiles, watched him from the shadows, knowing they had one. The ballroom air was thick with triumph and malevolence. Richard and Eleanor, their perfect smiles fixed in place, watched Marcus with a cruel anticipation. Thomas, their son, now a puppet of their will, stood between Marcus and the portrait, his vacant eyes a silent testament to the horror they had wrought. "You see, Marcus," Richard's voice was a low, chilling purr, "the price of our immortality is not just youth. It's the very soul. Alistair's soul, trapped forever in his masterpiece. And your little friend Evelyn's soul, slowly being siphoned away, a beautiful, agonizing sacrifice. And now, my son Thomas, a vessel, empty and obedient. You cannot harm us. You cannot destroy the portrait without destroying them. You have already lost." Eleanor stepped forward, her silver gown shimmering. "You are just a man, a mortal. You cannot fight against us, against time itself. Our power is absolute." But as Marcus looked at the portrait, at the silent, screaming face of his great-uncle, at the hollow eyes of Thomas, a thought, a wild, desperate idea, began to form in his mind. The letter from Elias Vance. The canvas is a cage. It wasn't just the canvas itself that held the souls. It was the entire structure. The painting, the frame, the magic that bound it all together. He looked down at the key in his hand, the key to the ballroom, the key that had been on Richard's person. It was an ornate old thing, piece of a puzzle. It wasn't just a key for a door. It was a key to something else entirely. "You're wrong," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not going to destroy the canvas. I'm going to set them free." Richard and Eleanor's perfect smiles faltered, a flicker of genuine confusion on their faces. Marcus raised the heavy brass poker, not towards the canvas, but towards the ornate, gilded frame that surrounded it. "You made a cage," he said, his voice ringing with a new, fierce clarity. "But you forgot that even a cage has a lock. This isn't just a key to a room. It's the key to the cage." With a sudden, powerful motion, Marcus jammed the key into a small, almost invisible crevice on the side of the frame. He twisted it, and a loud, metallic click echoed through the silent ballroom. It was the sound of a lock of a cage being opened. Richard and Eleanor's smiles vanished completely, replaced by pure terror. "No, you fool! You'll break the spell!" Eleanor shrieked. But it was too late. Marcus swung the heavy poker, not at the canvas, but at the corner of the frame. With a sickening crack, the ornate wood shattered. The moment the frame broke, the ballroom was plunged into darkness. The ethereal light that emanated from the portrait went out completely. A horrible, guttural shriek, a sound of agony and rage, erupted from the canvas. The screaming face of Alistair Thorne, no longer silent, contorted in a final, horrifying grimace as his form dissolved into 1,000 motes of dust, scattering into the air and vanishing. He was free, but a lifetime of imprisonment had left him with nothing but a final, bitter release. And as the light returned, what was revealed was a scene of pure, cosmic horror. Richard and Eleanor, the ageless patriarch and matriarch, were no longer perfect. The moment their power source was shattered, their bodies began to age, not slowly, but in an instantaneous, grotesque torrent. Their porcelain skin sagged and withered, their hair turned a shocking white, then thinned and fell out in clumps. Lines that should have taken decades to form carved themselves into their faces. Their perfect clothes became loose and tattered. Their eyes, once vibrant, became clouded and milky. In a matter of seconds, they became what they should have been all along. Two ancient, shriveled husks, their final, horrifying state a mirror of the decades they had stolen from their children. They stood there, two living monuments of their own terrible greed, their faces a grotesque mask of shock and decay, forever frozen in a moment of irreversible defeat. And what of Thomas and Evelyn? They too were transformed, but in a different way. The moment the spell was broken, the youth they had been drained of came rushing back, but not in a way that restored them. It simply pushed them forward instantly to their rightful age. Evelyn, who had looked to be in her late 20s, sagged into the body of a woman in her 60s. Lines appeared around her eyes and mouth. Her hair was now streaked with gray. And Thomas, the broken shell, was no longer a puppet. The stolen years returned to him, but they returned with a vengeance. He became an old man, his body frail, his face deeply lined with the pain and loss of a lifetime. The vacant look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a terrible clarity. He was free, but the toll had been immense. The family portrait, now just a piece of canvas within a broken frame, was no longer a vessel of souls. It was just a painting. The spell was broken. The Abernathys reign of terror was over. Marcus, gasping for breath, looked at Evelyn. She was now a stranger to him, but in her eyes, he saw a flicker of the hope he had once seen. Only now it was tempered with a profound sorrow. They had won, but the victory was a tragic one. They were free, but at a terrible price. As for Marcus, he would forever carry the memory of that night. The Abernathys mansion was later sold off, its secrets locked away, and the town of Willow Creek returned to its peaceful existence, blissfully unaware of the cosmic horror that had been hidden in plain sight. But the story lives on. It is a cautionary tale, a dark reflection of our own obsession with appearances, with defying the natural order. It asks us, what would we sacrifice for a perfect life? a perfect image? It reminds us that some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some portraits are best left unpainted. And so we come to the end of our story. If this chilling tale of ambition, obsession, and the dark cost of perfection has captivated you, please let us know. Click the like button to show your support, and subscribe to Family Secrets Unveiled to stay on the edge of your seat for our next dark discovery. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Until next time, remember, not all smiles are genuine, and not all stories have a happy ending.